what we are trying during all these discussions and talks here is to see if we cannot radically bring about a transformation of the mind.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening and taking time out of your personal lives to be present during the first inaugural K-Lecture. A few household items first, please. I kindly request you all to put your phones on silent. There are Wi-Fi access cards floating around on the chairs. We are at the lower ground floor and data connection is not so great when you go semi-subterranean. So if you can pass those around if you do need data connection. We have our own photographers present during the event. I mean, please feel free to take some snaps here or there, but we do ask you to kindly refrain from taking any recordings during the talk. Afterwards, feel free to take more pictures. Feel free to post on social media if you like. If you wish, you can tag us on LinkedIn using the handle International Center for Sustainability. This event is also being recorded and will be posted on our website for future reference, so you'll be able to find it back there. We are not expecting a fire alarm. However, if in the event that we do need to use the fire exits, there is a door to your left in the center and a door at the back. The first door leads to the main entrance where you've all arrived at, and the door at the back will exit you through the kitchen to the courtyard. Last item, washrooms. The ladies' room, if anyone needs it, is one flight up the stairs, and for gentlemen, it is 3 flights up.
So discriminatory.
It's good for your exercise. There is a lift, actually, if anyone has any mobility issues. So welcome to the International Center for Sustainability. Allow me to share a little bit about us for those of you who might not know us so well. We are a think tank. We were founded just under a year ago in April of last year, so we're fairly new on the scene. Our mission is to foster a deeper alliance between the United Kingdom and India. We do this through research. We do this through learning and development and influencing policy through our research. And sustainability underpins all of our initiatives. So you're all present here at our first K-Lecture. You might be wondering, what is a K-Lecture? Why have we named it a K-Lecture? The image at the front on your right is a portrait of Jiddu Krishnamurti, who we have named the K-Lectures after. Krishnamurti is a renowned philosopher, speaker, spiritual teacher, and author. He advocated against following any form of doctrine or authority or specific teacher. He urged freedom from cultural and spiritual conditioning and really urging an emphasis on critical thought and self-inquiry. And it is in the spirit and the ethos of his legacy that we are launching these talks. And we hope you have a pleasant evening. So tonight we're going to be talking about ethics at the intersection of AI and society. As always, AI is an incredibly topical subject. At Davos at the moment, at the World Economic Forum, the topic is collaboration for the intelligent age, and all the publications that I'm seeing online center around talks on AI. We're all looking forward to the Paris the Paris AI Action Summit in February, in which the focus will be on deepening international collaboration on policy. I'm sure you've all seen, or many of you will have seen, the recent news of our Prime Minister in the United Kingdom announcing the AI Opportunities Action Plan, which is aimed at growing the UK's AI sector, increasing AI adoption in the economy, and also improving our public services. And lastly, many of you might have seen in the news yesterday that on Trump's first day as president, he has revoked the AI executive order, which imposed regulations and safeguards on AI development in the US. So, also just highlight the importance of why we're here tonight and having this talk. We are going to be talking about the ethical complexities of applying AI in the real world. We will be talking about inclusivity, diversity, cultural representation in artificial intelligence, and we'll also be talking about justice and equity when using AI in the public sector. So, with no further ado, allow me to introduce our esteemed panelists. To my left directly is Ansgar Koene. Ansgar is the Global AI Ethics and Regulatory Leader at Ernst & Young. He is also a renowned AI ethicist. He has had a celebrated career in the robotics industry, and Ansgar is also a fellow at the ICFS. To my right, we have David Wood. David is co-founder of Symbian. He also chairs the London Futurist podcast. I personally enjoy listening to it very much, so if you don't know it, I would say put it on your radar. I continue to be incredibly impressed with the caliber of speakers that you have on your podcast. Maybe you can send them our way. And David is also a fellow here at the ICFS. And then to my far left, we have James Wilson. James is also an AI ethicist, and James is a lead generative AI architect at Capgemini. And both James and Ansgar advise big tech as their clients in navigating the tech framework of regulation, which I'm sure is a hornet's nest and a Charlotte's web, but they also advise their clients on ethical and responsible use of AI. So with that, I would like to kick off our first question of the evening. Should we have a global unified AI system, or should there be country-specific AI models which adapt AI to local cultures and local practices? Now, I would like to start with Ansgar on this question, please. And in the essence of time, I'd like to ask all panelists, please, if you could keep your answers to around 3 minutes.
Sure. So, I mean, given also the center that we're at, I think the opening position that we need to respect cultural differences and that systems should be built to take that into account is, I believe, probably one that many of us will be sharing. And if we look also at things like the official position of the UN, that every country should be free to develop its own positions and free from foreign interference, that is the official position sort of global consensus. However, of course, if we look at the reality of it, these systems are being created by a small handful of firms that effectively are sitting in 2 countries, the US and China. And the default is for a singular model to be created and to be deployed globally. Unless there is a concerted effort by the local cultures to require that these systems are going to be adjusted to take into account their locals, the locals' particularities, they will simply be exposed to that singular kind of system, which by default will give you a response that meets what is sort of the average of the main data set that the system is being trained on, plus actually a deliberate skew towards the culture that these systems were being created in, which means if you ask the system from when to when does the working week run, it will tell you from Monday to Friday. It will never tell you that it runs from Sunday to Thursday, as it would in an Islamic country. If you ask it if you deploy the AI for doing content moderation, it will be extremely sensitive to moderating nudity because the US has certain opinions around nipples and stuff like that. But it will be quite lenient on moderating violence and those kinds of things because of cultural attitudes and that. So the ideal would be something, a recognition of cultural diversity and that, but unless concerted efforts are made to actually push these systems to be created in that way, the default is that they are deployed as a unified, singular perspective.
James, may I ask you to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, everything Ansgar said, but I would also just add that there are efforts, I know that I've seen press around them release, or at least companies like Meta and so on, using African resources to do a lot of the work, and it feels very exploitative for the way I see it. You know, they're using cheap labour to do their content moderation and so on and so forth. But flipping that around, there's a book, I can't remember the lady's name, but it's called Code Dependent, which is all about the use of these sort of developing countries to do a lot of the labour for the oh, I love this phrase, the tech broligarchy, which is basically, if you saw the inauguration with Adolf Musk and Muppet and Zuckerberg, they're a bunch of smiling oligarchy, but they're getting all the labour out of it, particularly out of Africa, saying that while it's exploitative, and it definitely is, actually it's brought a lot of good. I mean, it's raised the level of the level of standard of living for a lot of people within that country at the same time. So there is some balance to it. But to your point, though, I absolutely agree that culturally there's too much of a divide. They're very different. I spoke to Jade about this a while back. I think we were all on the phone about. Do any of you familiar with? Were you all familiar with the trolley problem? Yeah, I presume you know, but there's an MIT website version of that called the Moral Machines, which is a place where you can go and it will simulate 10 different scenarios for you where your car is going to hit a grandma, it's going to hit a child or a person with a buggy, or it's going to drive you off a cliff or whatever, and you have to choose in each one of those scenarios what your decision would be. Just as an example of the cultural differences, when they analysed the data, people from Asian countries and Japan and all those sort of areas, they would have saved older people, whereas people in a lot of the Western countries would save the mother with the pushchair or whatever, because culturally they're very different. I don't agree with me on that, but it's people from Asian countries typically respect their elders more.
I took that test, and all I ended up doing was killing people left, right, and centre in the choices I had to make,
really
which is
curious.
the nature of the test.
But when we actually, I was reading some of the analysis that MIT did, and this is a complete sidebar, but actually there is a school of people who actually go on there to see what they can get the highest score.
Oh, goodness.
So they're just...
David, would you like to comment on this?
I'll start by giving a book reference that builds on what James was saying. A few months ago, I listened to Feeding the Machine, the Hidden Human Labour Powering AI. And it talks about work of people in Uganda and quite a few other countries around the world. It shows that it's a complex thing building this AI products, which we like to use. So that's Feeding the Machine, the Hidden Human Labour Powering AI. Didn't agree with all of it, but my goodness, my eyes were opened as to a lot of things that are behind the scenes. I think it's a very pressing question, not just how are we creating AI on the global stage, but what constraints should we be hoping that everybody respects? So I'm in favour of diversity. Absolutely, diversity is one of humanity's greatest blessings. We should encourage and enable diversity. If we are too monocultural, we will not be resilient. We will be diminished. We will be weaker in all sorts of ways. But I think there are limits to diversity, and because of the greater power that AI is going to unleash, we need to be a bit clearer about what some of these limits should be. So if we don't agree on these limits, and if we don't bring everybody to that same shared agreement, that despite the variations there are some things that are universal, then I fear There will be countries that are doing bad things with AI, which will have an effect on the rest of us. It's like managing, I don't know, water. You know, there might be two countries next to each other and they might each want to manage their shared water resources. Well, one of them can't just make the decisions unilaterally because whatever they decide will affect the neighbouring country. It's the same with managing pollution. If a country has one set of views as to what's tolerable pollution, the neighbouring countries suffer. Well, with AI it's more complicated, but AI can be seen as generating a kind of pollution worldwide. And I don't just mean fake news, I mean the change in culture. You know, as people interact with AI, they often change, and it changes their society. We have what's sometimes called an outrage industrial complex. You know, there's a huge industry that makes money by making people outraged and spending time online, and that's bad for our culture. So I think what we need is a matter of priority, is a global conversation, a bit like what happened in 1946, 47, 48, the agreement on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We need to bring that up to date, and we need to have an agreement not on 100 different points, but maybe a few points where things are so dangerous that we should not allow anybody to do it. And this isn't just a matter of harm, it's a matter of avoiding ruin, because if we're not careful, AI could have a ruinous effect. So that's my starting point. Celebrate diversity, but let's have an agreement with multiple perspectives as to what we care about most of all. And one thing we care about is not ruining the planet for everybody.
Thank you. Great insight. I loved also how you're reminding us of the type of global collaboration that we did have in the 40s around the Convention of Human Rights, and that really should be the type of discussion that we should be having now around the safety of AI. Thank you, David, and both of you as well. Let's move on to the second question of the evening. I'd like to discuss the application of AI in government use with you all, please. Specific to decision-making and the offering of public services. And James, I'd like to start with you, if I may. How far do you think government should go when applying AI and taking into account the needs of justice and equity?
I think there's a level of caution that should be in place about where they're using it. I mean, there was great examples with the Compass, the system they used in the States, Compass, which was a system they used to help work out people's length of sentence and likelihood to recidify, and it's dreadfully biased. So we need to be very, very careful about where we apply these things. We also have to consider that it's not a level playing field, because we're going to have totalitarian states are going to be using AI and much more. I mean, we know in China, I mean, it's a surveillance state. They have a social credit scoring system and so on. It's unavoidable for them. I think to some extent we also have some of that by stealth, if you like, in the way that we use data, and some companies use data in the West as well. But from a government perspective, I've seen good examples, particularly in Finland. The Finnish government, I actually did some work with the Finnish government about 4 or 5 years ago now, and they built this sort of digital human capability, which is now basically it's a digital twin version of an individual, which would allow you to model different journeys through. So let's say you're moving from, or you're emigrating to Finland from Iceland or Sweden or somewhere else. You can actually use it to model all that journey for you in terms of all the tax implications, how you would find schools for your kids, and all that kind of stuff. Really, really clever. Really well applied, because what they did was they made it very individually centric. So it's down to you as an individual to decide what services you want to interface with. There's no marketing. No, your data is yours. It's entirely yours. You can have as many instances of yourself as you like. You can remove as many as you want, and try different scenarios. Really, really good example. And then Finland, I feel that maybe it's something about the Nordic countries in Scandinavia, that the they seem a little bit more advanced in the way they're doing things. I mean, the Helsinki University's AI literacy course, which is open for everybody, by the way. You can all do it. It's in English, and it's fantastic. We don't have services like that in the UK, or at least not to that standard. I think some countries are pushing AI literacy more than others, and I think if you do that, it enables you to build more trust in your population, which allows you to roll out more services in a safe way. That would be where I go.
Thank you. Ansgar, would you like to comment on that?
I think you made some really important points around the literacy, which is also one of the key things that needs to exist within the public sector as they're thinking about bringing on board the use of AI. Government and public services is a space that can definitely benefit from having more tools that can help deliver for all of the people who need these services. But of course, the key is that public sector, it needs to be able to serve all in society. And that is a big differentiator between being able to roll out something in a commercial setting where you need to be able to capture a certain part of the population that's going to be your clients. But if the system doesn't work for 10, 20% of the population, that's not necessarily a deal breaker because you've managed to capture enough of a sector to have a viable commercial engagement. If you're public sector, you have an obligation to be able to serve everybody in society. And that is a very big additional threshold to get over, because that means you need to be able to deal with all of the outliers. That's exactly the challenge that we're seeing with the autonomous vehicles. If they only work on 90% of the roads or 90% of the road conditions, etc., everybody's going to encounter those 10% where it fails, and that's not sufficient if you want something that's full autonomous, which is one type of threshold. But so government definitely needs to be looking at how to use these tools, but it needs to look at it in an informed way, have the literacy to be able to ask the right questions during the procurement process in order to make sure that alternatives are in place for those people that maybe couldn't be captured by it, and in order to take the time, make the investments to make sure that it actually is going to capture a broader part of the society and understand where it doesn't work well and have those alternatives in place. So there's absolutely a need for it because we've got so many areas where there's huge waiting lists, be it at the NHS, be it in the judiciary, be it in many other areas. So having AI would really have a benefit to people, but the risks need to be taken seriously if you're deploying it in something in the public sector. We've seen in many countries when they did move ahead quick, that when a failure occurred, it could lead to massive failures. The Netherlands had a huge issue with their system for identifying benefit fraud, system risk, led to people committing suicide because of their financial problems and being accused of crimes that they hadn't done, etc. Australia has had huge problems with an automated system on debt repayment, with the system was basically withholding people's benefits for repaying debts that they didn't have, and stuff like that. Postmaster scandal. The US has had issues with automated systems for allocating Medicaid to people. Basically, don't underestimate the challenges for making something really work in the public sector.
And I think just to add on that, sorry for jumping a bit, but I think now it's so much in the public psyche, AI, that they're looking for these things, these issues, and it's they're looking for ways to not trust AI, to not be comfortable with the rollout of it. I mean, you saw as soon as Keir Starmer's action plan came out, my LinkedIn feed was just flooded with people criticising it.
And negativity.
Yeah, it was all negativity.
Yeah.
Sorry, David.
Yeah.
That's fine. So we must learn from what's gone wrong already. We must learn from what's right already. There are good examples. Heard about Finland. Even simple things like the last couple of times I renewed my, well, the last time I renewed my passport, there wasn't much AI involved in that, but it was much better to do it online than in the olden days, and renewing my driving license. But we have to get it right, and we have to understand what's going wrong, because we're going to have more complex AI systems before we know it. And if we look at how AI is changing, one thing is this new announcement, Stargate. It was going to be vast amounts of money, 100 billion. Though Elon Musk is complaining, he's left out of that Stargate deal. He's saying, well, they've only got 10 billion really. But anyway, they're going to have a vast amount of money to train new AI systems, which will probably make their way into government use in a few years. And even with today's AI systems, what we're going to see in 2025 is a move towards agentic AI, in which AI agents aren't just making decisions, they're not just generating pieces of art or pieces of writing, they're actually acting in the real world. They are sending letters, they are in some cases even having responsibility for looking after a fund, and they're autonomously making lots of decisions without getting back to a human to check this and that. So we're going to see more of this, and we're going to have to therefore demand various principles. And the principles that I think are going to have to be raised up include transparency. Do we understand what's actually going on there? And if we don't understand it, that's no good. We shouldn't just say, hey, it's a magic black box that seems to get it right, because it will get it wrong sometimes. That's what we learn from magic black boxes. It has to be explainable. It has to say, well, I recommend this person not be offered a mortgage, and here's why. I recommend that this person is brought in for another scan of a possible cancerous tumour, and here's why. So it has to explain itself. Even more important, humans have got to remain in control. We must avoid a slippery slope in which we start off occasionally testing the systems and then letting our guard down, and then before we know it, there'll be a really bad situation, much worse than the post office scandal. And that was terrible. That was humans not understanding what was going on. That was people not being honest when they knew there was issues already. But imagine if the AI is plumbed in more deeply and it has some more systematic defect that only shows up after a while. So we need to understand that. The other thing we need to understand more is the whole subject of biases. And that's very complicated, because sometimes biases reflect something about the real world. You know, if you ask an AI, draw me a picture of the people who signed the US Declaration, there shouldn't be people of multiple ethnicities in that, because they weren't. That was a matter of fact. If you ask Google, show me some pictures of maths professors, a few years ago, you might get the top 20 pictures, 19 of them were male and only one was female. Is that correct or not? Well, it might be that most maths professors are male, but is that what we want to reflect to society? In fact, if I think back to my days as a maths student in Cambridge, late 70s, early 80s, I think every single one of my professors was a male, as it turns out, although there were plenty of females in the class. So understanding bias is hard, and we need to, again, be transparent about it and understand what are we trying to do, what are we trying to reflect, are we trying to reflect reality, or are we trying to hope that AI is going to give a picture of a world that we think can be and should be. So we need to think hard about this, and we need to come down to first principles rather than just being swept along in a wave of excitement. Yeah, this looks great. You know, that kind of cowboy approach is a recipe for disaster.
Thank you. So proceed, but proceed with caution.
Proceed with wisdom.
Wisdom. I'd like to talk about power, the legitimacy of power, accountability, ethics washing, and on that note, Ansgar, I'd like to ask you first, please. You know, where are the main decisions about on ethical application of AI currently being made, and how do we hold those with the power to make those decisions to account?
So on the one hand, we have quite a number of high-level meetings and discussions between government people, between academics, coming together, forums like the G7, forums like the OECD, forums like the AI Safety Summit, and in February, the AI Action Summit, where we get people who represent society, who've been voted for, etc., discussing and formalizing things like the G20, OECD, AI principles, and those kinds of things that put it forward how these kinds of technology should be governed. But of course, the reality is when we look at how is this technology governed, practically speaking, well, it's governed by those who build it. It's governed by a small handful of tech companies. They make decisions around how they're actually going to build this. They make decisions about, yes, we're going to appoint an AI ethics committee, but are we going to give them any power to actually influence what we're building, yes or no? Are we going to keep them in play once this becomes a domain where there is actual competition to get to the market quickly, yes or no? And they have this power because of their market position, because of their technological leadership. Is that a valid reason for them to have this power? Well, it's a valid reason, but is it something that we as a society consider to be the appropriate reason for them to be able to make these decisions? Well, that's not how we've structured democracy. So we've got a challenge here. We've got some jurisdictions that have moved to say we need to counter that power of the certain sort of tech players by putting in place mandatory requirements as formalized in things like regulations, like the AI Act. How strongly will they really position themselves in the implementation of this, in the enforcement of that? We don't quite know yet because these are in early stages. The underlying technology standards for what does compliance actually mean with this regulation don't exist yet. It's still quite in flux. The capacity doesn't quite exist yet at the regulators to do the assessments, to check whether these things meet the obligations. And of course, there's the geopolitics that comes into play, especially now as we're seeing the developments in the US with requests for the US government to support big tech in pushing back against external jurisdictions imposing their points of view. How is this going to play out? How would the UK really take a position if a social media platform's content moderation doesn't meet the obligations under the UK Online Safety Bill Act now, or equally in other jurisdictions? These are things that we haven't quite seen yet play out. We're seeing a bit of the narrative building, but we haven't quite seen yet who will take a stand. This is going to be a challenging space.
Yeah.
James, accountability around big tech?
Yeah. So let's start with some numbers. So I mean, I heard today, confirm this or not, that the US AI Safety Institute has been disbanded. Trump apparently has disbanded it, or is in the process of disbanding it. The UK AI Safety Institute, which is responsible for governmentally assessing the safety of systems, had a budget last year of £10 million, which is probably less than the Diet Soda budget for Microsoft's headquarters. So there's not enough money being put in at a government level to assess the safety of these systems. And don't get me wrong, and this is a really bizarre coincidence, but I actually ended up having a conversation with David Knott, the UK government CTO, today, because he was at an event I was at today, and we just ended up having a conversation about this. And there's a lot of good things that they're trying to do, and and the action plan does go some way towards doing that. So you've got the government's, that's the government position, is we don't have enough happening at a government level. You've got the US Barnum and Bailey circus that's going on over there. Who knows what's going to happen over there? Stargate, you know, it's chaos. Then you've got sort of the tech bros who I think are still think they're driving things, and are to some extent still driving things. I mean, from an ethical standpoint, I was horrified. I mean, I think the whole thing about the Meta Ray-Ban sunglasses, I think they're abhorrent. I genuinely think that they are. And then I was at an event recently, and somebody
Can you maybe
wearing,
elaborate for the audience who don't know
you're
about the
familiar
Ray-Ban?
with these are the glasses that will take your video for you without people knowing. We actually had somebody who was in a meeting and was actually told to remove them. They didn't know because there was secure conversations going on in the meeting. There are these pendants now that will record conversations and transcribe them for you. All of these things are being rolled out, and yet they will say they're doing things ethically. And if you actually look at Meta's website for these Ray-Ban glasses, there's a link. It's like down the bottom right-hand corner somewhere. If you click it, it will take you to the 6 things that you should do to make sure you're using your glasses responsibly. The number 1 is that you should wave and tell everybody in the room that you are taking a video before you do it. Meta's first advert for these Ray-Ban sunglasses, which I don't know if any of you've seen it recently, Meta's first advert for it shows some pop star walking into a room and filming stuff. At no point in the advert does he wave. So they're just full of crap, basically. But which is why I actually think what we need to be doing is, rather than just sort of talking about the problem, I think what we need to be doing is we need to be acknowledging that you need a buffer layer between governments who are struggling to get their head around this and somewhat under the influence of big tech, what big tech are choosing to do, and the people that actually want to deploy these systems, and even if it is a government, they need, quite frankly, they need organisations like ours as a buffer layer in between there, who can actually apply some responsibility about the way that we apply. And I'm not trying to sell you my services, but I'm just saying I think there is a need for a layer that doesn't exist formally to be a buffer between big tech, the government, and society.
David, can I add another question to you specifically, and please comment on this as well, but on this specific point, you know, in the EU in 2022, the Digital Service Act was enacted. In the United Kingdom in 2023, the Online Safety Act came into effect. You know, these are both seen as ways of strengthening accountability and responsibility for big tech, or of big tech. And in the US, under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which we were talking about on our call, which, by the way, was passed in 1996, which is when, on average, which is when in the United States, 20 million Americans were on the internet for an average of 30 minutes a day. So very different time. You know, that act, Section 230, in essence acts as a get out of jail card for social media companies, because there is no justice for victims of social media crimes, and that's reiterated by the many cases that have been brought forward and failed for these victims. So to add another question for you, David, in continuation on this.
No pressure here.
How effective are we going to be at creating responsible and ethical AI if the US doesn't fall in line and get on board with this?
Well, the US is made up of many states, and many states may still have independent decisions and independent power. So it's possible that at the federal level they may take some decisions, and at the states they may take different decisions. So I don't write off the US by any means, and I think the current new administration is in a volatile state, and they may want to throw off the shackles that they think is holding them back, and they would like to rush faster, but they will inevitably also rediscover the reasons why it's important from time to time to be prudent as well, because they will have disasters too. Yeah. And the vision that technology should be used responsibly and thoughtfully isn't just something on the Democratic side of the aisle. There are many Republicans who have a similar appreciation. So I don't write off the US involvement. But in the meantime, we have to do the best we can in the rest of the world. And when the meeting in Paris is in a few weeks' time, there will be people there who used to have on their business card at least US AI safety institutes. They may be regrouping, I don't know. There will be people there from many other countries, and they will be trying to strengthen each other. Now, the question as to these laws, which, as you pointed out, some of them are quite old, some of them have caused a lot of problems, some of them are unpopular. Well, it's a bit like technology products. It used to be the saying that Microsoft technology products aren't any good until they reach version 3. Now, maybe the laws aren't very good until they reach version 3 as well. At least the beginning is a trial, and then you learn it doesn't quite work, and you've got to be able to iterate it, and then you iterate again, and maybe eventually you get the right balance. You hit the sweet point. You don't try and regulate everything, you just regulate the parts that might cause ruin, which I talked about earlier. The sad thing is, however, that we're much, much slower at creating laws than we are at developing new technology products. As a society, we have to change that incentive. We have to encourage people who have got two skills. They understand technology, but they also understand policy levers. And it's rare for people to understand both these fields. We need to bring them, and we need to encourage them to act quickly and to build policies in an agile, lean way, corresponding to how many technology products are built in a small, lean way. Now, we had some criticism of big tech earlier, and I used to be part of big tech, and I like a lot of what big tech does. I admire much of what Microsoft and Google and Apple have created. Industry often does wonderful things, but as they become more powerful, then they can start following a different set of objectives. They are less responsive to the needs of customers, and especially if they perceive themselves to be in a titanic struggle for success. If, for example, Microsoft is trying to steal back the search crown from Google, who uses Microsoft Bing? Almost nobody. But if you could have a better AI beside that Bing search barrier, well, that's worth racing for, isn't it? So Microsoft is in a titanic race with the help of OpenAI against Google. And in a broader scale, we've got the Western companies in a titanic race against Chinese competitors. That race is bad news, because when you're in a race, you tend to cut corners. You tend to think, well, I'm not going to do it quite right, but if I let that other guy do it, he's going to mess it up much worse than me. And that seems to be part of the psychology of all the tech leaders. They know they might get it wrong. All the leaders of the big tech AI companies have admitted that there is a risk that AI might be doing as much damage as nuclear war or climate change. They have all signed that short letter. But in reality, they're not doing much about it because they're in a race. So we have to balance the pressures of big tech with a powerful state. And at the same time, we need to keep an eye on a powerful state with what I call a big society. We need to have an active academia, active set of non-government organizations, active press, active journalists, active judiciary, which is ensuring that the government doesn't get too big and too cocky, because that would be an existential risk too, especially if the government was using AI to improve its surveillance and manipulation. So absolutely we need to bolster a powerful society to help then the state to ensure that big tech no longer races irresponsibly. I'll finish by quoting two prime ministers ago, Rishi Sunak, yes. Rishi Sunak said, we can't let big tech mark their own homework. That's exactly right. We leave big tech to mark their own homework. They'll do what Volkswagen did. They sort of cheat the emissions tests so they could bend the rules there. And big tech is currently often cheating its own safety principles. And we absolutely need to get these AI safety institutes have more power. And whether we get that right or not will determine whether we're sitting here in 5 years' time still discussing this, or whether we've gone back in a state of barbarism because big tech has ended up ruining the planet.
Well, on that happy note...
That's a call to action. That's
a call to action, most definitely. And for all of us as citizens and
part of big society.
Part of big society and active participation. Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you all for your contributions this evening. I found it a very insightful panel and discussion, and I hope the audience has too. Before we get to Q&A, I'd like to ask each of you if you were to leave us with one thought on the topic. And then
Should we have the Q&A first? Or?
We could do both. Yeah, why don't we do that? That's a good idea. Let's do the
I'm sure
Q&A
there's
first,
wisdom in the
and then
audience,
good idea. We'll do the
we'll
Q&A
complement
first,
what we've had.
and then we can wrap up with your final thoughts.
Hands up already.
Top front right, please, Chloe.
Thank you. In your opening comments, Jade, you made the point about the UK and India, and I'm interested to hear that India has not been mentioned subsequently in your comments.
Yes.
There's an immense amount of innovation happening in India, but it also perhaps falls into that category of a place of cheap labour, which was mentioned earlier on. So I'd just be very interested to get observations from any or all of the panel on the role that India may play.
Definitely. I would love to hear the panel's thoughts on this. And prior to this evening's talk, I was sharing with Ansgar because my colleague Pravar and I had a very insightful conversation last week with, and his name escapes me, which is embarrassing at the moment, so forgive me, but he runs a company called BBSAI, which has been tasked by the Indian government to support them in rolling out what India calls Bharat GPT. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with that or not, which is a fantastic initiative by the Indian government focused on increasing the inclusion of the entire society in the use of tech and AI. And in India, only 20% of the population speaks English. And the remaining 80% speak a variety of other languages, and which amount to many languages, but are boiled down to kind of 17 main languages. And a lot of this initiative is about making AI accessible to this 80%. So it's really a wonderful inclusivity drive, but they are doing it on their terms, in their way. They are not relying on foreign tech. India has invested in tens of thousands of GPUs to make available to the AI development companies and technology at, I believe, either free or incredibly below market rates, very, very affordable, with the understanding that the government is allowed to benefit of the developments that come out of that. But India is well on its way of creating AI that is country-specific, that is inclusive of local cultural values to India. I wanted to share that this evening, but I felt that these three gentlemen had much more clout and expertise than I do on this topic to share. But please, Mark's question.
Sure. Maybe I'll just start off. So, I mean, obviously, India has a big and globally important IT sector. However, India has not yet managed to really move from the being a service provider to foreign companies when it comes to something like AI, to being a leader that is putting forward its own products and services onto the market as something that is really grabbing the attention. So this is still a step that hasn't quite yet happened. I'm sure it will happen at some point, possibly not in the very distant future, but it hasn't quite happened yet. So I think that's one of the reasons why it hasn't attracted a lot of attention during our conversation so far. The other point is, of course, also the Indian government and sort of its approach to, do we need to regulate AI? Yes, no, it's been a bit of a back and forth, and reflecting probably also the level of understanding of exactly what the issues are that are rising in this space. So it's just not yet positioned itself as at the forefront of where the thinking and the development in this space is, but I'm sure it will be coming pretty soon.
I mean, the only thing I'd add is, I absolutely agree, but the only thing I'd add is that when I was last in, I think it was Pune and Mumbai, sometime, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, there was quite a lot of billboards around that were I can't remember the exact language of it, but effectively it was an attempt, and they were sort of propaganda type billboards that were attempt to reposition India as not being a service provider anymore, but being its own entity. Now, I don't know, I haven't seen where that's gone, but I think it's probably hampered by some of the stuff that you mentioned, Ansgar, about them not really being sure about how to approach it. But yeah, sorry, I haven't really got a great answer to that at all.
In order for there to be large language models that work native language, you need quite a lot of data, and it takes quite an effort to assemble that data. I was in Saudi Arabia a while ago, and they had a very conscious effort to collect more written Arabic so that their own versions of LLMs could be more reliable, because there is this scaling phenomenon. If you add a lot more data, it has a big impact. So one problem with many of the Indian languages is there isn't quite so much written material, and people are trying to assemble it. The second thing you've got to do is, after you train it with the language, you've still got to do this human layer of checking on the top. And that also takes a lot of time. And so these things don't happen overnight. And the good news is that there are now a number of Indian language LLMs, and they're building on open source initiatives, so they're taking stuff from the likes of Hugging Face, and they are working on it, but it's still going to take a bit of effort. And it needs to get the data right, but it also needs to get the reinforcement learning by human feedback layer too. Otherwise it might end up giving kind of cultural responses that are appropriate in the West, but not for different parts of India. And of course, there's a variety of different cultures in India, so it wouldn't be appropriate necessarily for what's in Pune to be the same as in other parts of India.
Yeah, very good point.
It's
a large country.
If I may just add one more point, why I think India is potentially positioned to become a leader quite soon. India has moved forward on a very important aspect, which is the digital identity for citizens. And if Estonia has been frequently sort of put forward as the poster boy of how to make public sector services easier for everybody. And if you hear the former Prime Minister of Estonia, what was the most important thing for being able to do that? It was digital identity for every citizen. And the fact that India has moved forward on this is going to give India a good position to build out towards, especially on things like public sector use of AI.
Great, thank you. Great question also. Maybe Andrew at the front.
Thank you. Since we're in a room dedicated to a philosopher, I'd like to ask a sort of semi-philosophical, perhaps maybe psychological question, which is...
We love those.
Yeah. So the thing I find weird about the term artificial intelligence is that many experts, whether they're philosophers or psychologists, still can't really agree what human intelligence is. Is it consciousness? Is it the ability to create new ideas? And we know we're debating AI agents and chatbots and whether they can answer questions based on queries, which is essentially just basically a benchmarked model, right? We don't know whether that model's been gamed or whether it's legitimate, or even what the test is, if the test is actually even valid from a sort of general intelligence point of view. So my question really is there any evidence that you gentlemen have seen that any models actually reason or show any cognitive processes that you could be associated with what we would ordinarily think of as human intelligence?
Well, human intelligence, as you say, has many, many dimensions to it. That's one of the beauties of human intelligence. But there are people who study this, and there are a whole bunch of different things where in the last few years AIs can do things which previously were thought to be far beyond their capabilities. Playing the game of Go was thought to require a kind of fascinating intuition, and it turns out that modern AIs can do that better than even the best Go players. Before that happened, people had predicted, the computer scientists thought it would take at least another 10 years, and the human Go experts thought it would take at least another 20 years. In a famous article just before, in fact, Google's DeepMind did go through that threshold. There is evidence of creativity. there is lots of music that can be created. Although people dispute whether it's creating a new field or just being creative within a field. For example, you can get it to listen to lots of bits of music by Bach, and it can compose new pieces of music, and you play them to an audience, and you don't tell it where it came from, and you say, well, this might have come from the real Johann Sebastian Bach, and they say, yeah, I knew it. It's just so powerful, it moves my soul. And then you tell them it was created by an AI, and some of them say, well, actually, I had a niggling feeling, it was a bit clunky. So it passes that Turing test, if you like. But if you played all the Bach music, it's not going to suddenly invent Beethoven's music, not yet. So that is something that's still to come. But it is coming up with new engineering designs. It's coming up with designs which at first make human engineers scratch their head, and then afterwards they think, oh, actually, that's quite an interesting approach. So there's creativity there. And very importantly, it's coming up with new suggestions for drugs. If you look at what in silico medicine is doing, Alex Zavaronkov, future Nobel Prize winner, potentially, Alex Zavaronkov, spoken at London Futurists in the past, long before he became famous. Quite fond of him. He's a big friend of Jensen Huang, the leader of NVIDIA. His AIs are now producing a number of brand new drugs which are quite novel, and they're going through tests, including tests on humans, quite quickly for some really nasty diseases like idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. So is this conscious? It's almost certainly not conscious. Is it creative? It's creative to an extent. It's probably more creative than most humans. You know, there's this famous bit in the movie, is it AI, in which the Will Smith, I think the actor, says to the AI, can you do all these wonderful things? And the AI, the robot says back to him, can you? And he has to say, well, he's no Mozart himself, you know. So it's probably more creative than most humans already. And if we see the trajectory that it's on, I think there is every reason to think it might outperform us in many of the other things that it can't do yet. So it's a reason to pay attention. It's a reason to not just be distracted and go back to more ordinary things. The world may change in remarkable ways in a short pace of time. So let's understand it. And let's not be misled by the hype merchants, of which there are some in big tech, who make even stronger claims than are justified.
Thank you, David. Great answer.
Can I add? I slightly disagree with David, but not hugely. I genuinely feel that we're still dealing with effectively, as it was put in the paper, stochastic parrot. It's word complete on steroids to some extent. There's maybe some evidence that that's changing, but I bloody hope it isn't, to be brutally honest, because I think the last thing we need. I mean, let's divorce intelligence from consciousness and sentience. They're three different dimensions of what we are as human beings, or at least I know I'm conscious. I don't know any of you are conscious. You could all be simulations, as far as I'm concerned. But the thing that I would say is that we do not want consciousness at all. And personally, I would fight tooth and nail for us not to produce conscious AI. I think the challenges it would cause for us. And I know, again, David, you and I disagree on that. To some extent,
I don't want conscious AI to be created either.
But I genuinely feel that we are making a big problem for society if we suddenly turn, our Alexas have to start having rights like a human being. That's not where we want to head right now.
The more conscious they are, the more likely they are to make their own decisions about what's good for the planet.
Yeah, which is not what it's not aligned to us necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'll get off my soapbox and stop being so nasty.
No, thank you. Chloe, I believe there was a question behind you, please.
Hello, hi, I'm Rose. I'm a freelance journalist. I just want to briefly ask a question more around kind of going back to legislation and regulation. I don't know who this is directed at, by the way, but anyway, if anyone's got anything they want to say. So look, we've got lots of governments around the world trying to figure out, get their heads around their own regulation, their own legislations for AI, because we've got no single overarching body, right? And then we've now got the tech bros who are in this arms race that's just been turbocharged because Trump's decided to kind of take off the guardrails and go for it. So the race is on even more. And many would look to America maybe to put those guardrails on and to kind of lead the way. So that in itself is interesting. So do any of you have any kind of thoughts about realistically which laws could actually be used to bring big tech to heel when it comes to the actual the responsible development of AI? I mean, I've heard people talk about product liability laws in the US, which obviously, you know, we don't have that here. You know, I've heard stories about the emergence of intimacy AI, which I think is the kind of there was a boy in the States who committed suicide, I think, recently.
Cyril Seltzer. It's
exactly.
a horrible case.
Awful case, but this is kind of an example of the next type of AI that's evolving, that's being adopted maybe, and I'm just really interested to know whether any of you have any kind of practical solutions for bits of regulation or law that could be adopted by different countries to tackle the potentially irresponsible development of AI. What's going to really bring the big tech to heel to make them put products on the market that are responsible?
Okay, can I start? Because I've got one there.
Please.
It is never going to happen. It's my dream. You know, if I could just change everything now, I would put in place the Hippocratic Oath for development of AI solutions, or an equivalent to the Hippocratic Oath. And basically that I would have anybody who breaks the terms of that oath disbarred, or whatever you call it, for whatever happens to a doctor now, to stop them from being able to practice. That will get them focused.
But they don't intentionally break it.
Well, they'll be a lot more careful about not breaking it.
So maybe if I can actually connect this one slightly to the previous question, which is to say that one of the starting points is to continue to insist AI is a tool. Whether or not you think it scores high on some kind of an intelligence test is besides the point. The organization that is deploying the system is responsible for if it fails. Responsibility needs to clearly lie with one of these parties that is actually has the capacity to build in the safeguards. If we allow the narrative to move into an area where they're going to abdicate responsibility and say, well, you know, the AI did it on itself, then we're really in a problematic space. Having established that responsibility must lie with an organization that is building or deploying it, we do get to the question, is it with the deployer or the builder of the system? Because if, you know, various countries are approaching AI from a slightly different question, how are we going to regulate? Or should we regulate it by making sure we apply our existing legislation to AI as well, or do we need to pass new legislation? We have anti-discrimination legislation as well. So we arguably don't need new legislation to deal with biased AI. However, if we're applying existing regulation, it generally means we're applying it to the deployer, because it is if a hospital adopts an AI system to help them with triaging which patient gets treated first or not, that hospital will get judged on whether or not they are being discriminatory in how it is. So the obligation then lies on the hospital to make sure that their system doesn't fail. Does the hospital have enough negotiating power with the creator of the system to be able to make sure that they will build it appropriately, or will the hospital end up being the one that carries the liability, gets sued or whatever for when the system fails? That is one of the arguments for saying maybe we do need new legislation for AI, because we need to make sure that the obligations lie with that party that actually has the capability of making the changes. However, passing new legislation is in itself something that takes time, is complicated, and how are you going to make sure that gets right? Will we need to get to version 3 before it is the right version? So it might be faster, more effective to go with making sure existing legislation gets applied correctly, but then you really have that power question. And there is, of course, anti-competition laws and those kinds of things that are meant to address the question of the power dynamic. But then we get into the problem, but these are companies that are in the US. If anybody's going to meaningfully apply these kinds of legislation to these big tech companies, it would have to be the US. And certainly this president is not necessarily inclined to want to think that because a company is big that might be a problem. Whether or not, it's not completely excluded that he might take a view on big tech companies because he's got different kinds of constituents that are speaking to him. But so that's a bit where we are. Various countries can already put in place lots of obligations, but they will mostly fall on the deployer, not on the provider.
I want to mention Control AI. That's a website, Control AI. It's an organization headquartered here in London. I think they are the best site for information about options to control AI. They have a document called The Narrow Path, which sets out a set of ideas. It's a living document, so it's been revised already a couple of times. And they have an ongoing initiative. They actually had a video the other day of lots of times when Donald Trump had said AI might be dangerous. You know, when he says everything, so you can easily. but there was a whole. It was quite impressive. You know, Donald Trump was saying, you know, we've got to be careful what we're doing here. It depends who the last person was that he was talking to. So Control AI is one option. There are probably at least 20 organisations that are trying to do something similar. So there's too many of them, and there's going to be a shake-up. And many of them are meeting in Paris. Many of them are not invited to the big AI Action Summit, which is only for the really big boys, but there's a whole bunch of others meeting on the sidelines. And so on the Sunday, before the Monday, I somehow managed to get a ticket for a gathering of lots of these organisations who've got their own views. And we'll be trying to figure out where should there be alignment, where is the common cause, and which are the big, most promising initiatives. And so I think there will be a distillation, there will be a reorganisation of that community. They won't all come down just to one, but there'll be a smaller number taking things forwards. Practically, I am a big fan of product liability laws. The software industry has always said, well, if we are made responsible for bad things that happen with our software, we'll never be able to operate. And so that's why when you sign the license, basically you give up all your rights. You know, if bad things happen because you use the software, it's up to you. And that is not acceptable, and I think it's clear that that has to be changed. And I think the software companies would accept it, provided it was done fairly. And they're always afraid that it's going to benefit just the big guys, or that somebody else is going to be missed out, which is why it has to be applied uniformly, and it has to be applied in a way that still allows innovation. And so the smaller companies for whom complying with the regulation might be a big issue, they need to be able to get help on this. Maybe the government should be helping them to ensure that the software meets compliance processes.
And I think Europe, the EU AI Act is like the flagship piece of legislation, but actually they also have product liability laws, and they have Digital Services Acts and so on. And in fact, most of the things that have actually been seen as being, so the EU AI Act's gone from being, wow, somebody's done something, this is really cool, to now everybody's saying it's really stifling innovation and holding them back. But actually, if you look at what it was that actually stopped them releasing Llama 3.2, and what it was that stopped them releasing the Apple OS, the new one that's got ChatGPT embedded in it, it wasn't the EU AI Act. It was GDPR in one case, and it was the Digital Services Act in the other one. So there is a suite of different laws in place here already. It's finding the right ones, the ones that will work, and not blaming everything on the EU AI Act, because it's not actually all that bad. To be honest.
Those are not actually all that being enforced yet.
No, to be fair.
The first set to get enforced will be starting
in August, isn't it?
in February. It's the prohibitions start in February. So at this particular moment, none of it is being enforced yet.
Good point. But another thing, there was a comment back, I think it might have been you said something about they don't do these things intentionally, or they don't. Back to your Stuart Seltzer example, did everybody know about the horrific example of character.ai? This chap created a chatbot in the style of the Daenerys, is it, from Game of Thrones? One of the main characters, Emilia Clarke's character. And this chatbot actually convinced Saul that he should join her on the other side, and he did, in the bathroom of his house with a shotgun, with his parents downstairs. I mean, it's absolutely horrific. And if you actually follow the scripts of the conversations, which are incredibly harrowing, you just realise that there were no guardrails on what it was doing. There was no effort at any stage for it to actually inform anybody, even the parents, that there is this child is vulnerable. He's in the wrong place. The two people that created Character.ai, and I've forgotten their names now. One's Brian, but I can't remember their full names. The two people that created it were ex-employees of Google. One of the last actions they took at Google before they left was they released a paper, it's still on Arxiv now, which is about the dangers of anthropomorphizing AI. Right. So these, you can't say these people, they're just not thinking things through.
But they are pursuing money, that's what it is. They have their angels to tell them to be respectful of ethics, but then you think, oh my goodness, it's such an opportunity. Let's make some money and then we'll be a benign philanthropist.
Yep.
They've done lots of damage in the meantime. So we've got to change the incentive structure. We've got to make it more desirable for people to be seen as virtuous rather than being rich.
Hippocratic oath.
A lot of testing is needed.
Yes.
I'm conscious of time, and I can imagine that our audience would like to engage and ask questions. So I'll take one last question, if that's all right with the audience.
Maybe you could collect from multiple people questions and then...
Sure, yes, let's hear both, please. Before the gentleman at the back, please.
I'm never very good at short questions.
Try your best.
So, Hans Rosling taught us that humans are biased based upon the biases of their teachers. Lawmakers are old, laws and regulation are slow to be affected. For 30 years ago, I was implementing American tech into the European market space, trying to do it locally, sympathetic. The Americans couldn't understand that. That was an advertising agency trying to deliver a global campaign locally. But on a sustainability thing, there's lots of things. The Meta glasses, for accessibility purposes, people with disabilities love the Meta glasses because they are significantly cheaper than the accessibility tech, which costs thousands of pounds. The Meta glasses cost hundreds of pounds. Yeah. And global population has increased by 43% in the 30 years of my tech career, which means, the adoption of AI is astonishing. And it offers the convergence that I've been promised all of my life. The input of one system should be the output of another, the other way around, sorry. The promise is astonishing, and the AIs are perhaps less biased than the humans. What do you think about the AIs? The AIs should be in charge as the benevolent dictatorship.
Well, okay. Wow. And to add on Tony's final question, please, aggregate them.
Thank you. Who might have thought that we are discussing AI ethics just 24 hours after Mr. Trump released his Stargate? How significant it is. We are obviously on the shifting ground because we don't know what really will happen. But I wouldn't be an utter pessimist because we still have Congress and the Senate, especially the Committee on AI Safety, which famously published the New Manhattan Project 2 months ago. I mean, the name is really not the appropriate one. But what it suggests is that within the Congress and the Senate, there is enough of, say, wise people who probably wouldn't allow Trump to go too far from what may be established or agreed in Paris. We're just 3 weeks away. So AI alignment, or the value alignment, which has not been really discussed here, is extremely important and directly linked to what will be discussed in Paris. And the impact of Trump's decision on the future of AI institutes is to be watched very carefully. I just checked that the AI Institute in the States hasn't been formally disbanded, but there are implications of the Trump's decision which essentially would put it aside. Okay. That is the danger. So,
okay.
Yes.
Gentlemen, who would like to go first?
I'd like to make one very quick point then, but You're absolutely right. The glasses for people with visual impairments is a genius thing. I totally agree with you.
Terms are amazing. I'm using AIs as an accessibility tool at the moment.
Yeah.
Because people can talk to them however they talk to their machine with whatever tech they use. So I don't need to worry about how I deliver to them. I deliver to their AI, and they talk to their AI, and they send me the results back.
Yeah. No, totally agree. Totally agree.
I think one of the big challenges for AI, which in a sense also connects back to that question, is AI really intelligent, is it doesn't actually operate the way that we think. It does this, it creates a model that is an extraction of finding patterns within the data. We don't know exactly what kind of patterns it's been extracting, which is why the kinds of errors that it creates are different from the kinds of errors that we create when we.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of the risk comes from. We are looking for errors in places that we know that humans make errors. We're not looking for failures in areas where these machines make failures. Which famously from the autonomous vehicle space, you put a little sticker on a traffic sign and suddenly it doesn't recognize the traffic sign completely. And a human looks at it and goes, how did this make a difference? But so that's an area where a lot of the safety questions come from, is that we don't actually really understand what kind of decision-making process. Now, if with the AlphaGo, for instance, Stuart Russell makes as his example where he's saying, yes, AlphaGo beat the world's champion at Go. However, it actually fundamentally doesn't understand certain aspects about which stones belong together. And if you just use that as a way in which you're going to create your pattern, even though you're playing Go in a way where you totally lose against a human master, you can win against AlphaGo because it doesn't understand that you're building actual patterns here.
And it never got excited.
Yeah. Or we weren't able to read it.
I don't know about that.
We weren't able to read it, possibly. David?
Well, I had a good experience with Ray-Ban glasses. My son was wearing one when I was out with him, and my grandson kicking a ball together, and he was wearing them and running around, which you couldn't have done so easily with a phone, and he was filming us on and off, and it was great. Now, I knew he was doing it, so I think there are plenty of cases when it might be useful. But we still need to think through the implications, and that would be fine in that case, but in another case, it may have drawbacks. Should an AI be in charge? Should we put a superintelligence in charge? Well, look at Elon Musk. He's a superintelligence by many criteria.
By his own admissions, yeah.
And people used to say, wow, it'd be great if he's in charge of everything, wouldn't it? And now everybody's sort of backpedaling, and maybe it's not so good, because superintelligences still have bugs. So if we could be absolutely sure the superintelligence had no bugs, and if we could be sure it had its values aligned with ours, maybe so. Maybe that will be the future. We'll be looked after by machines of loving grace, to use that phrase. But until we're confident that it won't have a bug, and as Ansgar pointed out, there can be bugs in very obscure places. AIs have killed people because they have misunderstood humans. Robots have killed people. Robots that are handling production lines, they thought a human was a box that should be picked up and crushed. And why would they make such a stupid mistake? Well, because it's operating with different parameters and different training. So I'm not in a hurry to trust Elon Musk as a superintelligence or any other superhuman superintelligence. I think one of the most important inventions of humanity is the separation of powers. It's the checks and balances. So let's not trust one person too much, whether it's Donald Trump or Elon Musk or anybody else or any AI. Let's have a big society rather than a big single brain.
Thank you. Well, and on that note, maybe that is your final nugget of wisdom that you would like to leave us with, but maybe you have some other imparting thoughts. Gentlemen, in a nutshell, because we are quite over time, and apologies to people, but any last wisdoms you'd like to impart on us? One final thought on the topic of the evening?
I think I'd just reiterate, AI is a tool and responsibility, and therefore the obligation to make sure that it doesn't cause harm lies with people.
Thank you.
That's kind of good way of finishing. I mean, for me, it's all about us being human first. We should be doing this, or at least planet first, as well. And it's not all about just racing forwards with technology. And by the way, technology is not the solution to every problem we have.
It's time to take back control of technology. Public must demand that big tech can't just do whatever they like. The people in big tech must feel under obligation to respect what the public want, rather than just think they know best. And that's not going to happen unless the public speaks up very clearly and convincingly. And that in turn is not going to happen unless the public is confident that actually there is a good future ahead with AI as a tool. That if we make AI safe, then it is going to achieve lots of things we want to in terms of justice, flourishing, health. So that's the stage we need to get to. And how do we get there? Education, education, education. Which means a two-way flow. It means exactly the kind of thing we're doing tonight. Let's do it a lot more.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, on that note, I'd like to close the panel discussion and thank you all for your contributions and thank everyone for coming this evening. I realize I never introduced myself. So,
who are you?
Who am I? Alexa. No, I'm Jade Hagan. I'm a Chief of Staff here at the ICFS. So apologies for not sharing that up front. A few final words before I let you all go. We are a nonprofit. If you enjoyed this evening, please feel free to make a donation if you so wish. There's going to be a little table set up next to the portrait of Emmeline Pankhurst at the front here, and there is a plaque at the back with a QR code if you would like to do so. I'd like to invite you all to follow us on LinkedIn to stay abreast of our upcoming events. We host smaller, more intimate events. We have this series of our K-lectures, which are going to be a monthly occurrence that we invite you to attend. We also have online webinars. So if you'd like more information about all of that, please follow us on LinkedIn. And finally, I'd like to just promote our next K-lecture, which takes place next month on Wednesday, the 12th of October.
February.
Sorry, February. Don't know where October came from. Thank you. That was a glitch in the system. No. Next month, the 12th of February, it will be hosted by Lord Tony Sewell, who is present with us here in the audience. It will start at the same time at 6:30 p.m. Lord Sewell will be talking about the future of Britain and how British Indians and British Nigerians will become the new elite. Lord Sewell's also released a book recently on Black success and on the surprising truth around success, Black success. So I urge you to tap him on the shoulder if this topic is of interest to you, as he's with us this evening also. And thank you all for coming. And
can people become members of the...
People can become members. Thank you, David. See, this is why we have fellows with us on the stage. Thank you. We actually have our membership cards laid out near the drink station, and they will also be here at the little table next to Emmeline with more information on why it's beneficial to become a member, access to our information, access to our research. We are building a fantastic resource library upstairs that will be open to all of our members, and they are invited and allowed to use that space, and a plethora of more benefits, which you can all find on the flyer and online. So if you'd like any information around that, please do contact us. There's different packages for different profiles. There are a few students here this evening. We have a much cheaper membership offering for students to accommodate you as well. So, don't be shy. Thank you for coming, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed the evening.